More than 2 million Americans swallow blood pressure pills every single day. But how many of them know they may also be swallowing a slow-acting carcinogen? Since 2018, at least over 100 batches of these so-called life-saving drugs have been yanked off shelves after tests revealed nitrosamines, cancer-linked impurities so toxic that regulators warn even parts per billion could over time seed tumors in the liver, colon, pancreas, or blood. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. Many of those contaminated pills were taken daily by retirees, veterans, and working-class families who trusted the label on the bottle more than the companies that filled it. Some are now filing lawsuits, some are still waiting for answers, and all of them are left asking the same gut-wrenching question. How could medicine meant to save us become the very thing that might kill us? This is the Downturn Report, where the truth gets personal. Today, we pull back the curtain on 5 blood pressure pills contaminated with carcinogens, exposing how they ended up in American medicine cabinets, and showing you the safer alternatives you can still choose before trust and your health are gone for good. Number 1, Spironolactone. It's the kind of discovery that makes you want to dump every pill bottle in your cabinet straight into the trash. On August 5th, 2025, the FDA didn't just announce a recall, it lit a flare over the pharmacy aisles of America. More than 11,328 bottles of Spironolactone, 25 milligrams, each with 100 tablets, were being pulled off shelves after inspectors found something that should never exist inside a heart patient's pill. Aluminum. Yes, metal. The same stuff used in soda cans and car parts was hiding inside a drug meant to protect vulnerable hearts. Manufactured by Frontida Biopharm and sold across the United States by Sun Pharmaceutical Industries, this tainted batch, coded P3314 and set to expire on November 30th, 2026, was first slapped with a Class 1 recall, the FDA's highest alert level, reserved for products that can kill. It was later downgraded to Class 2, but no label change could erase the chilling truth. Millions of Americans who thought they were treating their blood pressure may have been swallowing fragments of a metal better suited for a scrapyard. The agency warned that patients might see dark fragments embedded in the tablets, as if their medicine had been sprinkled with shrapnel. People were urged to stop taking it immediately, return it to the pharmacy, and contact the distributor. Officially, no hospitalizations or deaths tied to the batch have been reported, but that's cold comfort when even tiny amounts of aluminum, once inside the body, can slowly accumulate, injuring kidneys, inflaming tissues, or disrupting the nervous system. A silent sabotage that creeps up over time. And for millions living on fixed incomes, skipping or switching prescriptions isn't a real choice. It's a cruel irony. The very pills meant to keep their hearts beating could now be planting a ticking time bomb inside them. This isn't Spironolactone's first stumble. A previous recall by Bryant Ranch Prepack saw 47 bottles yanked from circulation because of mislabeled strength. Some marked 50 milligrams actually contained 25, and vice versa. It sounds like a printing error, but in cardiology, a wrong dose can turn a controlled condition into an emergency room visit. These repeated mistakes show that something deeper is broken. A supply chain so obsessed with cutting corners that safety checks are treated like optional extras, not sacred duties. It's like watching a mechanic forget to tighten the bolts on your brakes and then acting surprised when the car crashes. The ripple effects of this scandal spread far beyond pharmacy counters. Stocks for Sun Pharma, Alembic, and Glenmark slid as investors panicked over quality control and global trust. Fierce Pharma even reported that these Indian manufacturers were already under scrutiny for other recalls tied to carcinogens and foreign matter. And Spironolactone was again at the center of the storm. Carcinogens and foreign matter. That's not a phrase you expect to hear in the same breath as prescription medication. And yet here we are, watching multinational drug companies treat basic safety like a polite suggestion, while older Americans, people who worked their whole lives, paid their dues, and now depend on these medications, are left to gamble with their health. So here's the question that should make every regulator and CEO squirm. How does aluminum end up inside a blood pressure pill? Are we really supposed to believe a few stray flakes accidentally fell in? Or is this the predictable result of factories shaving pennies off their quality control budgets to crank out more pills? When oversight is treated as a cost instead of a duty, risk doesn't just rise, it explodes. And when you're a retiree stretching every Social Security check, the cost of that explosion isn't measured in stock prices. It's measured in hospital bills, organ damage, and sleepless nights wondering if the pill you trust might be poisoning you. If the thought of swallowing metal makes your skin crawl, you're not alone. But there are safer choices. Alternatives from manufacturers like Teva, Lupin, and Apotex have not been linked to contamination in recent recalls, offering a glimmer of reassurance in a landscape that increasingly feels like Russian roulette. Still, the damage is deeper than one tainted batch, because once trust has been fractured, once patients realize even their life-saving medication might come laced with industrial debris, no pill on earth can fix that kind of betrayal. Number 2. Lisinopril plus HCTZ. If you ever needed proof that Big Pharma's assembly lines sometimes resemble a carnival game more than a science lab, here it is. On June 20th, 2025, Lupin Pharmaceuticals, a multinational giant with deep roots in both the US and India, was forced to recall 58,968 bottles of its widely prescribed blood pressure combo, Lisinopril and hydrochlorothiazide, after a pharmacy reported a chilling discovery. Inside a sealed bottle that was supposed to contain only blood pressure medication, there was a rogue pill, and it wasn't even in the same pharmaceutical category. It was atazanavir ritonavir, a powerful antiviral used in HIV treatment. Let that sink in for a second. A patient reaching for their daily blood pressure pill could have accidentally swallowed an HIV drug. That's not a minor mix-up. That's the kind of pharmaceutical blunder that could trigger drug interactions, cause serious side effects, or leave blood pressure dangerously uncontrolled. The FDA labeled the recall Class 2, a classification that technically means low likelihood of serious harm. But for anyone whose heart health depends on taking the right medication daily, low likelihood sounds about as reassuring as calling a loaded gun mostly safe. The affected bottles, manufactured at Lupin's Nagpur facility in India and distributed across American pharmacies between December 2024 and January 2025, were quietly pulled from circulation after the incident. Lupin emphasized that no severe health issues had been reported so far and insisted the immediate risk was remote. But for patients on fixed incomes who count every pill and every dollar, trust isn't measured in probability tables. It's measured in whether they can open a bottle without wondering what stranger might be lurking inside. And this foreign tablet scandal isn't happening in a vacuum. Lisinopril and its combinations have been repeat offenders in the Pharmaceutical Hall of Shame. Back in 2022, more than 222,600 bottles of Lisinopril were recalled after a pharmacy discovered metal fragments embedded inside tablets. Yes, actual shards of metal in heart medication. Around the same time, Lupin and Remedy Repack pulled additional batches over poor quality control, metal contamination, and mislabeled packaging. Blue Point Laboratories joined the club in 2020, recalling its 10 mg Lisinopril after tablet mix-ups raised fears of incorrect dosing, and the pattern goes even deeper. In 2016, Lupin yanked back its 30 and 40 mg Lisinopril tablets due to contamination during manufacturing, while Wockhardt recalled its 5 and 20 mg versions for similar reasons. That same year, the FDA banned 3 production sites linked to these companies for violating sanitation protocols, mishandling test data, and even destroying or falsifying records. Imagine the outrage if a restaurant was caught throwing away evidence of food poisoning. Now multiply that by 1,000, and you'll understand why regulators were furious. The courtroom has also been a battleground for Lisinopril's troubled legacy. Numerous lawsuits have accused Merck and generic manufacturers of failing to warn patients about severe side effects like liver damage, kidney failure, hyperkalemia, pregnancy complications, and even life-threatening angioedema, a sudden swelling of the lips or throat that can suffocate victims if not treated immediately. Consumer Safety lists multiple claims from patients demanding compensation for devastating injuries allegedly linked to this drug. And while the 2025 recall didn't involve nitrosamines or known carcinogens, the contaminated label still fits in a broader sense. When a pill bottle contains a foreign, potentially risky medication, contamination isn't just chemical, it's systemic. So what are patients supposed to do when even the pill bottle they trust turns into a game of pharmaceutical roulette? How is anyone supposed to swallow their prescription with confidence knowing that an HIV drug might be hiding among their blood pressure tablets? These aren't paranoid questions. They're the reality for millions of Americans who rely on these medications to keep them alive, often while juggling limited budgets, fixed incomes, and fragile health. And when companies like Lupin shrug off catastrophic errors as remote risks, it's hard not to feel like the people at the bottom, the retirees, the disabled, the working poor, are the ones paying the highest price for corporate carelessness. If this scandal makes you rethink what's in your pill bottle, safer alternatives do exist. Manufacturers like Hikma and Accord have produced Lisinopril and HCTZ formulations that haven't been linked to these packaging nightmares in recent recalls. But switching brands won't erase the bitter truth. Once the public learns that their life-saving medications can arrive with foreign imposters inside, no dosage strength in the world can restore the trust that's been shattered. Number 3. Losartan. It was supposed to be one of the safest and most trusted tools in America's fight against high blood pressure. A simple pill millions of seniors swallow every morning without a second thought. But in the spring of 2019, that quiet confidence cracked like a brittle pill under pressure. The FDA revealed that 87 lots of Losartan potassium, manufactured by Hetero Labs in India and sold under Camber Pharmaceuticals in the United States, were contaminated with a chemical that had no business being inside the human body, N-nitroso-N-methyl-4-aminobutyric acid, or NMBA, a nitrosamine impurity linked to cancer. Even more alarming, this wasn't the usual NDMA or NDEA the world had already been warned about. This was a new nitrosamine, previously unseen in ARB recalls, and its levels in the affected lots were above even the temporary limit the FDA grudgingly accepted. What Americans had trusted as a life-saving drug was now being described in the same breath as a carcinogen. The revelation set off a domino effect across the generic drug market. Hetero Labs rushed to issue a nationwide voluntary recall of its 25, 50, and 100 milligram Losartan tablets. But the damage was already spreading. Torrent Pharmaceuticals, another major ARB producer, quickly followed with an even bigger recall. 114 more lots pulled from pharmacy shelves, including 36 batches of Losartan alone and 68 batches of the Losartan hydrochlorothiazide combination. All of them traced back to the same contaminated active pharmaceutical ingredient supplied by Hetero. By April 19, 2019, pharmacies and wholesalers across the country were ordered to stop distribution and begin pulling stock. Patients were told not to stop taking their medications abruptly, a warning that landed like a slap in the face. Keep swallowing the potentially carcinogenic drug, the message seemed to say, because quitting it might kill you faster. How did we get here? The FDA's investigation pointed to sloppy, corner-cutting practices inside Indian manufacturing plants. Recycled solvents, poorly controlled chemical reactions, and cross-contamination during production all created the perfect conditions for nitrosamines like NMBA to form. In October, the FDA sent a damning warning letter to Torrent's facility, citing manufacturing conditions conducive to NMBA formation and ordering tighter quality controls. Torrent wasn't alone in its negligence. Mylan had already been cited for violating good manufacturing practices during ARB production, while Torrent itself had been accused of reversing failed test results and exporting out-of-specification batches. Even companies downstream, Camber, Sandoz, Teva, Legacy Packaging, Vivimed, were swept into the scandal when nitrosamine contamination was detected in their distributed lots. It was a reminder that in the global drug supply chain, one company's shortcuts can become everyone's crisis. And yet, despite the severity of the contamination, the FDA reported no confirmed cases of hospitalization, cancer, or death directly linked to NMBA in the recalled Losartan batches. Torrent itself admitted it had received no reports of adverse events. Still, the agency advised patients to keep taking their medication until a safe alternative could be provided. A recommendation that left many wondering if they were trading one threat for another. For older Americans living on fixed incomes who depend on Losartan to prevent strokes or kidney failure, this wasn't an academic debate. It was a nightmare choice. Risk a sudden cardiovascular event by stopping, or keep swallowing a pill now, tainted with a cancer-linked impurity. The scandal also exposed the ugly underbelly of America's dependence on foreign-made generics. What was once praised as an affordable alternative now looked like a fragile chain held together by profit margins and lax oversight. Nitrosamines didn't just sneak into Losartan by accident. They slipped through the cracks created by years of cost-cutting and regulatory complacency, and the consequences reach far beyond the factory floor. As contaminated lots vanished from shelves, shortages spread, prices spiked, and treatment schedules were thrown into chaos. Time magazine reported that the recall shook public confidence, forcing patients to switch medications and overwhelming clinics with desperate calls. Once the image of reliability, Losartan now stood as a symbol of betrayal, proof that even the most common, everyday pill could hide a threat as sinister as cancer. So where does that leave the people who can't afford to gamble with their health? Thankfully, safer alternatives exist. Manufacturers like McLeod's, Glenmark, and Allior have produced ARB formulations not tied to nitrosamine contamination, offering patients a path forward that doesn't come with a chemical question mark. But even with safer options on the table, the larger wound remains. Because once people realize the pill meant to protect their hearts may be quietly planting carcinogens inside them, no reformulation, no new batch, and no press release can ever fully rebuild the trust that's been shattered. Number 4, Irbesartan. For decades, Irbesartan has been one of the quiet workhorses of American medicine. A trusted ARB prescribed to control blood pressure, protect kidneys ravaged by diabetes, and shield the heart from long-term damage. But in recent years, that trust has been shattered again and again as wave after wave of recalls expose something deeply unsettling lurking inside those tiny white tablets. Nitrosamines, the same class of cancer-linked chemicals once more associated with polluted industrial runoff than with life-saving heart medicine. What was once marketed as a guardian of cardiovascular health suddenly started looking like a Trojan horse, smuggling potential carcinogens into the very bodies it was meant to protect. The unraveling began in January 2019, when the FDA announced a voluntary recall of one batch of standalone Irbesartan and 7 batches of Irbesartan combined with hydrochlorothiazide distributed by Solco Healthcare LLC. The reason? Tests revealed the presence of N-nitrosodiethylamine, or NDEA, a nitrosamine impurity known to cause cancer in laboratory animals, at levels above the agency's temporary limit of 0.088 parts per million. That announcement sent shockwaves through pharmacies, but it was only the beginning. Just weeks earlier, Sigen Pharmaceuticals had recalled multiple batches of Irbesartan in 75, 150, and 300 milligram strengths after discovering NDEA contamination in its API, sourced from Aurobindo. In a domino effect, Aurobindo itself was forced to pull back 22 lots of Irbesartan raw material, sending ripples through the supply chain and exposing just how fragile and interconnected the global generic drug market had become. The situation grew even darker in January 2021, when Lupin Pharmaceuticals announced a nationwide recall of its Irbesartan tablets and Irbesartan HCTZ combinations after detecting yet another nitrosamine, N-nitrosoirbesartan. Classified as a probable human carcinogen, this compound crossed the FDA's safety threshold in multiple tested batches. Out of caution, Lupin didn't just recall affected lots, it halted the marketing of all Irbesartan products, regardless of whether they had tested positive. The company's recall notice listed the batch numbers, NDC codes, and distribution windows spanning from October 2018 to late 2020, urging pharmacies, distributors, and patients to return their medication. Lupin admitted receiving 4 illness reports from Irbesartan users between October 2018 and September 2021, though none could be definitively tied to the contaminant, and none involved the Irbesartan HCTZ combination. But because nitrosamines are long-term carcinogens, ticking health time bombs that don't explode overnight, proving a direct cause and effect relationship is a daunting task even for seasoned epidemiologists. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer the systemic rot became. Aurobindo, one of the largest suppliers of Irbesartan's raw API, had already recalled its own materials due to NDEA contamination, raising hard questions about cost-cutting, recycled solvents, and lax quality checks in Indian and Chinese manufacturing facilities. Industry observers noted that Irbesartan, along with Losartan and Valsartan, shares a tetrazole ring structure that makes it particularly vulnerable to nitrosamine formation under uncontrolled conditions. A vulnerability magnified when oversight is replaced with corner-cutting and profit-first decision-making. What should have been a carefully monitored pharmaceutical process too often looked like a bargain basement chemistry experiment. The health fallout, at least on paper, appears limited. No confirmed hospitalizations, cancers, or deaths have been directly attributed to nitrosamine-contaminated Irbesartan, but the absence of immediate casualties is hardly comforting. Nitrosamines do their damage slowly, like a hidden arsonist setting fires molecule by molecule. Patients who took these pills for years can't simply rewind the clock, and every new report of contamination leaves them wondering whether their trusted medication has been quietly rewriting their DNA. The FDA's advice to continue taking the drug until a safe alternative is available felt like a cruel joke to many seniors. On fixed incomes, what choice do they have? Risk a heart attack by stopping abruptly, or keep ingesting a chemical tied to cancer because the supply chain failed them? It's the kind of choice no one should have to make, least of all those who worked their entire lives and now rely on these drugs to survive. And so Irbesartan joins Losartan and Valsartan as the unholy trinity of ARB scandals. Once hailed as medical miracles, now poster children for how deeply the pharmaceutical industry can betray public trust. Even today, lawsuits are circling, investigations continue, and many pharmacies still struggle with shortages caused by years of recalls. If you're looking for safer alternatives, manufacturers like Apotex, Glenmark, and Torrent have released ARB formulations that have not been flagged for nitrosamine contamination in recent recalls. But here's the bitter truth. Once a pill meant to lower your blood pressure becomes a source of anxiety every time you swallow it, no new batch or corporate apology can fully repair the damage. Trust, once poisoned, doesn't dissolve as easily as a tablet on the tongue. Number 5. Valsartan. It was once hailed as the gold standard of blood pressure treatment, a tiny pill that millions of Americans trusted to guard their hearts and extend their lives. But by the summer of 2018, that trust was betrayed in one of the biggest pharmaceutical scandals of the past decade. Zhejianghua Pharmaceutical Limited, ZHP, a major Chinese supplier of the active ingredient in Valsartan, admitted that its manufacturing process had allowed N-nitrosodamethylamine, NDMA, a chemical the International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies as possibly carcinogenic to humans, to infiltrate the drug. That single revelation detonated a public health bomb. Pharmacies across the United States began pulling Valsartan and its combination formulations from their shelves, not because of a labeling error or a production glitch, but because the very compound meant to lower blood pressure might now be quietly raising the risk of cancer. The FDA responded with one of its harshest tools, an import alert against ZHP, blocking its Valsartan shipments from entering the U.S. market unless they met stringent safety standards. A scathing warning letter dated November 29, 2018, laid bare a litany of violations: failures in manufacturing protocols, sloppy quality control, inadequate handling of materials, poor documentation, and ineffective safeguards against cross-contamination. It was a devastating portrait of negligence from a company whose ingredients were coursing through the veins of millions. And ZHP was far from alone. The contamination triggered a domino collapse that dragged down a long list of generic manufacturers and distributors: Teva, Solco Healthcare, Torrent Pharmaceuticals, Mylan, Aurobindo, major pharmaceuticals, and numerous repackagers, all forced to recall Valsartan, its combinations, or other IRBs after their products tested positive for NDMA, N-nitrosodiethylamine, NDEA, or NMBA. Torrent alone initiated a nationwide recall of all its Valsartan, Valsartan plus amlodipine, and triple combination Valsartan plus amlodipine plus hydrochlorothiazide formulations after finding NDMA in the API sourced from ZHP. The legal fallout was as explosive as the scientific one. By 2025, more than 1,300 lawsuits had been consolidated into a single multi-district litigation case, MDL 2875 in New Jersey, with the first bellwether trial scheduled for September 2025. Plaintiffs accuse ZHP, Teva, Solco, Torrent, Milan, and others of knowingly distributing contaminated drugs or failing to test adequately for impurities. The suits argue that chronic exposure to NDMA and NDEA contributed to liver cancer, colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, lymphoma, leukemia, and other malignancies. Some plaintiffs even allege that ZHP destroyed or withheld internal testing records, complicating efforts to prove the connection between contaminated medication and cancer. A move likened by legal analysts to shredding the black box after a plane crash. And yet, despite the scale of the crisis, no official death toll or hospitalization figures have been directly linked to NDMA and Valsartan. Nitrosamines don't act like poisons in a thriller. They don't kill overnight. Instead, they stalk the body over years, damaging DNA strand by strand, cell by cell, until disease appears. That slow burn danger makes causation difficult to prove and gives manufacturers plausible deniability. Meanwhile, patients, many of them elderly and on fixed incomes, were advised by the FDA to keep taking their medications until replacements became available. It was a cruel irony. Continue swallowing a drug tainted with a probable carcinogen, or risk a life-threatening cardiovascular event by stopping abruptly. The scandal also exposed rot far beyond ZHP. Milan's plant in Andhra Pradesh, India, received its own FDA warning for failing to control production processes, mishandling materials, and allowing cross-contamination, all while reusing solvents without proper labeling. Torrent, too, came under fire in a 2019 warning letter after investigators found that its Indian facility ignored written procedures, mishandled out-of-specification batches, and even reversed failing test results without justification before shipping products abroad. According to investigators, at least 340 finished batches were found to be substandard over a 2-year span. Yet 73% were eventually reclassified as compliant and exported. It was as if the industry had rewritten the rules of quality control on the fly, treating safety standards as suggestions rather than laws. This wasn't just a story about one tainted drug. It was a cautionary tale about the fragility of a global supply chain built on outsourced production and wafer-thin margins. When contamination crept into Valsartan, it didn't just trigger recalls. It caused shortages, drove up prices, and disrupted treatment for countless patients. It also shook public confidence in the very foundation of generic medicine, the belief that cheaper doesn't have to mean riskier. And for many older Americans, that belief may never fully recover. If you're searching for safer alternatives, companies like Alembic, Jubilant Cadista, and Par Pharmaceutical have released ARB formulations that have not been implicated in nitrosamine recalls. But the bitter truth remains. Once a medication trusted to protect your heart is revealed to have harbored cancer-linked impurities, no court settlement, no corporate apology, and no replacement batch can fully erase that betrayal. Trust, once fractured, lingers in pieces. And for those who swallowed these pills for years, the question may haunt them long after the lawsuits are settled. What else was hiding inside? Your medicine should never be a ticking time bomb. Subscribe now so you'll know the truth before it's too late.
Thanks so much for sticking with us to the very end. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our daily updates. And now feel free to check out some of our latest and most popular videos showing up on your screen. Goodbye, and see you in the next one.